Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we're covering something I rarely ever get to talk about. So before we jump into things, remember that if you enjoyed today's video to leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and make sure notifications are turned on so you don't miss future videos. So due to the general nature of Dev Diary, I rarely ever get to really talk about the failures or difficulties that come with making a game. And I am of the opinion that the failures are just as important as the successes. And more importantly, it's okay to fail as long as, you're learning from them. Which brings us to today's project, the game that no one played. On April 1st, a video was released on this channel titled "This Game Exists." In short, the video showcased a game about the player trying to find hidden letters in the dark. This game was called aptly Alphabets in the Dark. Accompanying the video was the simultaneous release of a playable version of the game featured in the video, which I feel the need to support despite the stupid concept that yes, it is a fully functional game. And at the time that I'm recording this, roughly 20% of the people who watched the video checked out the game, which is more than I'd anticipated if I'm being completely honest. But here's the thing, when I talk about the game that no one played, I'm not talking about Alphabets in the Dark, and in order to talk about just what that means, I'm unfortunately going to have to spoil the secret. So if you're at all curious, there is in fact more to Alphabets in the Dark and the April Fool's Day video. It's still there for you to experience for yourself, so please do so before continuing with this video, because from this point forward we'll be discussing details that spoil majority of that experience. Now with that out of the way, let's continue. As I said, Alphabets in the Dark is a legitimate game that can be experienced as it was showcased, but it's not the game that no one played. No, Alphabets in the Dark was simply part of something bigger, and that bigger something was a different type of game. It was part of my first attempt at an alternate reality game. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept, an alternate reality game is an experience that often blurs the line between fiction and reality. A few examples come from my favorite studio to do it, 42 Entertainment. They're responsible for the Dark Knight campaign, the 9 Inch Nails Year Zero campaign, and the one that kicked it all off for me personally, Halo 2's I Love Bees. Back in 2004. That's right, I've wanted to do this for over 20 years. God, I am old. Now I implore you to read up on these campaigns if you're at all interested, because they were all very intricate, intriguing, and arguably unmatched to this day. Anyway, this brings us to the April Fool's Day project. The video itself was meant to be abnormal in nature, with an emphasis on constant cuts to modified audio and glitchy visuals. Now, for anyone who bothered to give the game a go should have noticed some immediate inconsistencies. And that's because the version of Alphabets in the Dark that appears in the video is not the same version that is playable. And some of the differences were subtle, like the game sometimes drawing directly on your screen, or the more blatant, like the built-in ads from my Patreon, which only one person ever seemed to comment on, and I'm not sure if it was facetious or an honest attempt at connecting the dots, because that's exactly where things were meant to go next. I'll explain this in a bit, but the reality is that there are actually 3 versions of Alphabets in the Dark. The third version, the source code version from my Patreon, has its own secrets, which led to the quote-unquote end of the campaign. And this was considered the first phase, and had the campaign gained any steam, would have continued into phase 2. So let's explore phase 1, what went wrong, and what I learned. Starting with the first, the Patreon lead-in. A long story short, alternate reality games are not easy to make and are an extremely large undertaking. And because of real life, the weekly videos and everything else that takes up my time, adding in an ARG was going to be difficult. So the campaign had to be small with the intent of expansion based on engagement. This is why it was funneled through the Patreon, because I needed a definitive metric to justify the time and effort. It was a rather large barrier to entry, but it was also necessary given that I don't get to do this for a living. So time is always a precious commodity that I'd rather spend on things that people will actually want to experience, like Dev Diary content. So it was expected that with such a high barrier to entry that it would turn a lot of people off. What I did not expect, and I guess this is technically a good thing, is that no one outside of that one comment seemed to point out just how blatant the Patreon push was. And outside of like a single reminder per video, it really doesn't get pushed as hard. and I had totally planned to respond to those comments in character, to further the narrative. But instead, people took the video at face value and just accepted the content for what it was. And fun fact, when this channel started, there was always going to be this underlining fictional narrative. When Let's Dev began, the goal was to make content as normal, but to weave an ongoing story into the occasional video. However, as time went on, the game dev videos found an audience and things pivoted, and the whole fiction thing was dropped. But there were signs from the beginning, going back as far as the original trailer for this very channel, characteristics which were mirrored in the April Fool's Day video, even going so far as to use the same exact stock footage. Now, outside of barrier to entry, there were several things that weren't accounted for. The first being the average viewer's familiarity with my sense of humor. This is actually something I try to avoid, but putting an emphasis on referencing things majority of people know nothing about isn't going to bring in a lot of interest. And so an attempt at meta subversion was always going to be a bad idea, because I guarantee most people watched the video, saw the weird editing and thought, April Fool's? He's just being a weirdo. Which, yes, I was being a weirdo, but at the same time, I wasn't. And the wasn't part was not made obvious enough. It was too subtle. The second major mistake was having an expectation that anyone cares about what I do outside of a video. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but I've concluded that majority of people are simply here for a video, to see something develop and basically get a quick look under the hood of something that they may potentially enjoy playing themselves. But once the video ends, that's about it. Partly because that's just the nature of how YouTube is these days, and also because I've personally cultivated that type of relationship. Like, I'm just a guy who likes to make stuff for your entertainment, which I need to absolutely emphasize I am completely okay with. And so, however, the expectation that there's ever more beyond that transaction is to ignore the norm. And so, like a lot of things in life, making an ARG is a balancing act. One that I'll probably get better at next time, if there is a next time, and as long as I learn not to repeat my mistakes. But failure is normal, and if there's anything I think my game dev videos have proven over the years, is that practice is the only way to get better. When I started, I could only do the bare minimum with gamemaker, and now I'm capable of things I only dreamed of accomplishing back then, and I'm always still trying to learn. Like this was just a road bump. It might hurt the ego a bit, but there's no reason to be embarrassed. Like, I've finally tried to do something I've never been able to attempt in roughly 20 years. And if I'm being completely honest, I just hope it doesn't take me another 20 to try again. So that's that. There's a lot more I could say, but I've hopefully highlighted the more important of them in this video. I know that this was very different from the normal type of content. However, I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to remind people that failure is never the end, So I hope, if anything, that is the takeaway from this video. Now, before we wrap things up, feel free to share your own stories of failures and how they helped or hindered your progress. It doesn't even have to be game dev related. And again, if you would like to help me continue making these videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can get a whole bunch of perks that'll hopefully make it worth your money. But with that said, thank you so much for watching or listening or just giving me the time of day to hopefully entertain you. And I'll see you next time for our regularly scheduled Dev Diary.